Johnson impeached. In February 1868, Johnson fired Edwin Stanton, the Secretary of War and an ally of the Radical Republicans. Stanton's dismissal gave congressional Republicans the excuse they needed to move against Johnson. The House of Representatives voted, for the first time in American history, to impeach a president. According to the Constitution, once a president has been impeached, formally accused of wrongdoing, by the House, then the case must be tried by the Senate, where a two-thirds vote is needed to convict. If the president is found guilty of treason, bribery, or other high crimes or misdemeanors, then the Constitution gives Congress the power to remove him from office. Johnson's supporters argued that the president had done no wrong. They argued that the Tenure of Office Act was unconstitutional. They noted that the Constitution does not require the president to seek congressional approval to remove an appointed official, so that presidents since George Washington had dismissed cabinet officers at will. They asserted that the impeachment was a politically motivated act on the part of the Republicans. Johnson's accusers argued that the president had violated constitutional principles and the separation of powers. The president, charged Massachusetts Senator Charles Sumner, had transformed his veto power into a weapon of offense against Congress. Johnson, said his opponents, had tried to put himself above the law. Johnson's Senate trial lasted from March to May of 1868. On the advice of his lawyers, the president remained silent through the whole process, thus acquiring an uncharacteristic air of dignity. His opponents could not prove that any of his actions rose to the level of a convictable offense. In the end, Johnson was acquitted, found not guilty of the charges, but only by a single vote. Against their party's wishes, 7 Republicans voted for acquittal. They argued that if a president could be removed from office for political reasons and without evidence of wrongdoing, then the presidency itself could be controlled by whichever party controlled Congress, thus undermining the Constitution's separation of powers. Johnson survived impeachment partly by backing off of his attempts to interfere with the congressional Reconstruction. With the presidential election only a few months away, he was a lame duck with little real influence. But his narrow victory in the Senate had also worked against his fiercest enemies, the Radical Republicans. Life in the Reconstruction South. To anyone who had lived in the South before or during the Civil War, the contrast between past and present was perhaps the most vivid in the determination of African Americans to exercise their newly won political rights. After the passage of the Reconstruction Acts, the Southern states held constitutional conventions, with blacks as well as whites voting for delegates. Many whites did not vote out of apathy or bitterness, but African Americans flocked to the polls in overwhelming numbers, usually in proportions approaching 90% or 90% of those eligible to vote. Over the course of Reconstruction, some 2,000 African Americans held public office. Southern blacks made their influence felt not only in state politics but also at the national level. Between 1869 and 1880, 14 African Americans were elected to the House of Representatives and 2 to the Senate. Reliably Republican, African American voters helped elect former Union General Ulysses S. Grant to the presidency in 1868. The Republican Coalition. Supported by newly enfranchised African Americans, the Republican Party dominated the political life of the South during Reconstruction. Allied with African Americans were 2 groups of white Republicans whom Southern Democrats ridiculed as carpetbaggers and scalawags. Carpetbaggers were Northerners, often Union Army veterans, who had moved to the South in search of new opportunities. Hostile Southerners growled that these men had packed their belongings in carpet bags, soft-sided suitcases, and left home to profit from the South's misery. Scalawags, another word for scoundrels, were Southern whites who supported the Republicans. Many were small farmers or businessmen who had never owned slaves, and who were eager to make something of themselves in the post-war South. African Americans, carpetbaggers, and scalawags formed a Republican coalition that dominated the constitutional conventions as well as the new state legislatures. All of the new state constitutions guaranteed the civil and political rights of blacks. Many state legislators also enacted new social programs, including building hospitals, asylums, and homes for the orphans. Most notably, the new state constitutions established the first state-funded public schools in the South, an innovation especially favored by African Americans. The groups within the Southern Republican coalition did not always agree. For example, while white Republicans supported the establishment of public schools, few wanted their children to attend integrated schools, while African Americans supported the radical Republican proposal to grant freedmen land in compensation for 2 centuries of unpaid labor. Most white Republicans opposed the idea. Many white Southerners opposed the efforts of the new state governments. They accused government officials of corruption. The new state governments paid for their paid for the social programs, with heavy taxes on land, which fueled resentment among both small farmers and large landowners. Many whites were quick to blame black legislators for their post-war economic troubles. The new state governments were largely propped up by the Union Army. The presence of armed troops managed to maintain some fragile order in the South, but a Southern newspaper predicted darkly, these constitutions and governments will last just as long as the bayonets which ushered them into being, and no longer. Political violence. Some racist whites in the South formed groups to terrorize blacks and their Republican allies, the most widespread and well-known of which was the Ku Klux Klan, founded in Tennessee in 1866. Klansmen generally wore disguises, often white robes and hoods. They sometimes told their victims that they were the avenging ghosts of Confederate soldiers. Black political leaders paid a particularly hard price for daring to challenge white supremacy. 7 African American delegates to the state constitutional conventions of 1867 and 1868 were murdered. In Mississippi, the black president of a local Republican club had his throat cut in front of his wife. But the reign of terror extended far beyond political leaders. Freedmen were attacked for owning land or having achieved a modest level of prosperity. Sometimes blacks were beaten or whipped for neglecting to remove their hats in the presence of whites or refusing to yield the sidewalk to them. Because schools fostered black social and economic advancement, they became a special focus of violence. In 1870, nearly every black school in the area of Tuskegee, Alabama, was burned to the ground. In Georgia, the Klan murdered an ex-slave for being too big a man because he knew how to read and write. White teachers in black schools were victimized as well. Southern Republican governors appealed to Washington for help. In 1871, Congress passed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which declared it a federal crime to deprive any citizen of his right to equal protection under the law. It also gave the president the authority to use military force to enforce the act. Democrats protested that the act unconstitutionally extended federal power into state matters. Across the South, federal marshals began arresting suspected Klansmen, and federal prosecutors put them on trial. In South Carolina, federal troops occupied 9 countries and arrested hundreds of Klansmen. While this federal intervention crippled the Klan and decreased racist violence for the time being, a troubling issue remained. The federal army could not remain in the South forever. Once the troops left, who would protect the rights of African Americans in the South? Sharecroppers and the problem of poverty. For most African Americans in the Reconstruction South, their new political rights were not matched by economic opportunities. Throughout Reconstruction, Southern blacks continued to earn only about half as much as whites. In the agricultural South, black poverty was linked to landlessness. Most freedmen hoped that emancipation would enable them to farm their own land. Radical Republicans urged the government to seize the great plantations and to redistribute the land to freedmen, but these proposals never became a law. Most white landowners were reluctant to sell land, even to those few blacks who could afford it. Consequently, as late as 1880, only 1/5 of black farmers owned the land they worked. Out of necessity, most black farmers became sharecroppers. That is, they rented their plots from large landowners, and they paid the rent with a share of the crops they grew. Often the share was 1/2. The sharecropping system satisfied the desire of ex-slaves to work on their own, without masters or overseers, and with family members pulling together to bring in the crop. But most sharecroppers realized no profit from their labors. Starting out with little money at best, many sharecroppers were forced to buy their supplies on credit from merchants, who were often their landlords as well, and who charged high rates or interest. When cotton prices slumped in the 1870s, or when harvests were bad, most sharecroppers just struggled to make a living. Their problems were made worse by dishonest landlords and merchants, who often cheated them out of their fair share. As many sharecroppers fell into debt, African American poverty in the South became deeper and more widespread. National politics during Reconstruction. When Ulysses S. Grant, the former commander-in-chief of the Union Army, became president in 1868, the Republicans regained the White House. Grant said he hoped to heal the bitter divisions between North and South, black and white, Republican and Democrat. "Let us have peace," he said, on accepting the presidential nomination. But political strife and division often marked his years as president. The 15th Amendment. 4 months after Grant's election, Congress passed the 15th Amendment to the Constitution, which declared that the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or any other state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. The states ratified the amendment within a year. William Lloyd Garrison hailed the amendment as a wonderful, quiet, sudden transformation of 4 millions of human beings from the auction block to the ballot box. Many women who had been active in the abolitionist movement were upset that the 15th Amendment provided only for universal male suffrage. For black and white women alike, it would take another half-century to achieve the right to vote. But in the context of the 1860s, the new amendment was a bold step. Just 8 years earlier, 4 million blacks had been slaves. Now, all black men could run for office and vote. Scandal and division. Those who expected Grant to complete the work of Reconstruction were disappointed by his actions. Though in 1871 he sent federal troops to South Carolina to crush the Ku Klux Klan, for much of his time in office, his attention was diverted by other matters, including frequent charges of corruption and scandal within his administration. Grant admitted that he lacked political experience. As he said, "To go into the presidency opens altogether a new field to me, in which there is to be a new strife, to which I am not trained." Though personally honest, Grant was a poor judge of people. He appointed many officials who proved to be incompetent, dishonest, or both. The reports of corruption split the Republican Party. A group broke off to form the Liberal Republican Party. This coalition was not only alarmed by the growing The reports of corruption split the Republican Party. A group broke off to form the Liberal Republican Party. This coalition was not only alarmed by the scandal overtaking Grant's administration, but also growing tired of Reconstruction and increasingly unsympathetic to the rights of black Southerners. In 1872, when Grant ran for re-election, the Liberal, Republican, and Democratic parties both supported his opponent, Horace Greeley, a prominent newspaper editor from New York. Though Grant won re-election, the political climate was turning against Reconstruction. In 1873, the nation was gripped by an economic depression, with banks failing and unemployment reaching record levels. The depression distracted Northerners from the concerns of African Americans in the South. It also strengthened the Democratic Party, which cast itself as a voice of poor Northern workingmen, as well as Southern whites opposed to Reconstruction. In Grant's second term as president, newspaper readers were shocked by one report after another of the administration's corruption. Several high officials, including the Secretary of War, resigned in disgrace for accepting bribes. The whiskey ring scandal involved the theft of millions of dollars of government revenue. In the credit mobiler scandal, Republican members of Congress were granted low-priced shares of railroad stock in return for promising to approve funds for the company. Grant's own sister was implicated in the Black Friday scheme to use inside government information to corner the gold market. These scandals cast a dark cloud over the Republican Party and weakened support for Reconstruction. The Democrats captured several southern state governments, in some cases by using violence to intimidate Republican voters and keep African Americans away from the polls. In many southern states, white militias formed to overturn local election results and reinstitute white rule. Since federal troops were gradually withdrawing from the South, there was little that local Republicans could do to stop the violence. In Mississippi, Governor Adelbert Ames, a carpetbagger and former Union general, predicted that white violence would soon destroy most of the hard-fought gains of the Civil War and result in an era of second slavery. Despite Grant's plea to "let us have peace," the divisions in American politics were as bitter as ever. Republicans, increasingly allied with big businesses and Despite Grant's plea to "let us have peace," the divisions in American politics were as bitter as ever. Republicans, increasingly allied with big businesses and big government, squared off against Democrats, who appealed to the urban working class and, in the South, poor white farmers and those opposed to racial equality. The Compromise of 1877. In the 1876 presidential election, the Republicans nominated Rutherford B. Hayes, who was, like Grant, a former Civil War general. The Democratic candidate was Samuel J. Tilden, who campaigned against the incapacity, waste, and fraud of the federal government and the carpetbag tyrannies Republicans had opposed on the South. The election suffered from corruption on both sides. At first, Tilden seemed to have more votes. Then Hayes was declared the winner. Democrats accused Republicans of massive vote fraud. Republicans accused Democrats of voter intimidation. Congress appointed a commission to investigate the disputed results of the election. Behind the scenes, Republican and Democratic leaders worked out a deal known as the Compromise of 1877. Democrats agreed to accept Hayes' victory in exchange for the removal of all federal troops from the few southern states in which they remained. The withdrawal of federal troops would leave Southerners free to govern themselves. Hayes was inaugurated in March of 1877. Some Democrats continued to insist that he had stolen the presidency and ridiculed him as old Rutherford and his fraudulency. But Hayes stayed true to the deal his party had struck. He appointed cabinet officials known for their hostility to Reconstruction. He ordered the withdrawal of the remaining federal troops from the South. His actions made it clear that the federal government would no longer attempt to reshape Southern society or support African Americans in their struggle for civil rights. Within a few years, increased white violence and intimidation wiped out a decade of African American economic and political gain. Political power in the South shifted from Republicans to white Redeemer Democrats, as they called themselves, claiming that they had saved the South from Republican dominance. Reconstruction effectively had come to an end. The Supreme Court sets back Reconstruction. In the 1870s, a number of Supreme Court rulings limited the government's ability to protect the civil rights of freedmen. One decision weakened the 14th Amendment's guarantee of equal protection of the laws by claiming that such protection only covered a narrow range of civil rights. In another case, the court ruled that the federal government could not prosecute individual rights for infringing upon the rights of black citizens, but could only protect blacks from state-sponsored violence. This ruling made it impossible for the national government to stop white assaults on blacks. The mixed legacy of Reconstruction. Reconstruction left a mixed legacy. The rebellion states were successfully reincorporated into the Union. The new Southern state constitutions, as well as the passage of the 14th and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, prompted an unprecedented experiment in interracial democracy. For a brief while, millions of African Americans proudly claimed their rights as American citizens and created their own social, religious, and educational institutions. Yet, the end of Reconstruction saw most Southern blacks still stuck in poverty. With Democrats now in control of every Southern state house, white rule was reinstated. Over the coming decades, blacks in the South would lose most of the political and social rights they had gained, including their cherished right to vote. Looking back on Reconstruction, the African American scholar W.E.B. Du Bois observed, The slave went free, stood a brief moment in the sun, then moved back to slavery again. The Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution, ratified between 1865 and 1870, are often referred to as the Reconstruction Amendments. These amendments ended slavery and granted citizenship and its privileges, especially the vote, to former slaves who had been excluded when the Constitution was originally written. While assuring federal protection to these new citizens, the amendments could not prevent individual states from trying to get around the new laws, nor did they extend the vote to women. Some historians argue that the Reconstruction Amendments, in expanding civil liberties, transformed the Constitution and charged the federal government with a new role as the custodian of freedom, in the words of Charles Sumner, an abolitionist senator from Massachusetts. The following excerpts state the main provisions of the Reconstruction Amendments. Amendment 13. Section 1. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States, or any place subject to their jurisdiction. Amendment 14. Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny any person within the jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Amendment 15. Section 1. The right of citizens in the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude.